D-Ray, I have to say, uh, you're looking fly, man.
Thank you.
For those of you that are just listening to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your audio from, D-Ray is like dressed to the nines right now. Looks like he's about ready to go clubbing or photo shoot or something like that. So
This
props
is
to you.
actually what I wear on the trade floor.
That
Often.
makes sense. That
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, the first time I was ever really on a trade floor, not in Houston, was in Chicago. And for those of you that don't know, like in the energy sector, there's a lot of commodity trading that goes on. And we were doing a tour. We had just done a tour of like the refinery that we were up there. And I remember the person giving us the tour pointing to this guy down on the floor, and he was just wearing sweats. This is like 2014, 2015. So before that was maybe semi-acceptable outside of Silicon Valley. And they were like, you see that guy right there? He made $14 million last year.
Yeah.
His neighbor, he lives in the same building as Oprah. And we were like, oh my gosh, that's just insane. But when you make that kind of money, you can do and dress however you want. But I will say, you're dressed like $14 million, maybe $100 million right now.
You know what? Thank you, Austin. That reminds me, I gotta run an errand after I leave here. Yeah, daily basis. This is what I wear typically. Maybe not the glasses, but I have this light in my face, and my blue blocker glasses.
Gotta have it. Gotta have it.
Yeah.
Well, this is the third straight week that we've released an episode, and we want to thank everyone for supporting us the last 3 weeks. We did launch a newsletter, Brood Insights, and if you don't subscribe to that already, check it out on LinkedIn. We might move it to a different platform at some point, but it's got a lot of great content on there, and D-Ray has really been hitting the pavement with writing, and we hope you like it. And if you have feedback, commentary, or things like that, let us know. Just hit us up on any of the platforms. You know where to find us. But D-Ray, for this episode, I know it wasn't something that we really had planned on doing, but I texted you last week telling you that I had a panic attack, anxiety attack, and it was the first time that I had experienced it, and it was pretty alarming, to be honest with you. Just to kind of give a high level overview of it, I had gone downstairs. This was Thursday, at the end of January, early February. I don't know the exact date, but gone downstairs to grab lunch, started to feel lightheaded, and got back up to my desk to eat the sandwich, and started feeling like indigestion. Started sweating. My pulse had been kind of crazy. My heart rate had been kind of crazy that day on my Apple Watch. Nothing too high, but on the low end, it was kind of concerning. I don't know if it was just a glitch or whatnot, but anyways, I started to think maybe I was having a heart attack, and the reason why I believe that I thought I was having a heart attack is I mentioned back in August or September, whatever we last recorded before you went to the Last Chance qualifier, that one of my fraternity brothers passed away at a young age from a heart attack, and so it's kind of been in the back of my mind since then, almost every day, something that I've been thinking about my mortality, and we're all going to die at some point, but we hope to live a long life. And for me, I thought, okay, I know the signs and symptoms of a heart attack. To me, this is very concerning. So I went to the urgent care in Houston, and they checked my vitals. Pulse was good, blood pressure was good, checked the heart, the lungs. They said no concerns there. Then they did an EKG and said, yep, you're all good, nothing to be concerned about. But it was just kind of an eye-opening experience for me. One, it was nice to know that everything was good. But two, it was just, I think I haven't really processed, a fraternity brother dying. And I wouldn't say that I was super close with Billy. He was a little bit older than me, but I saw him every fall at tailgates and chatted with him. But it was just the reality of the situation of someone passing away and maybe not fully processing it, not talking about it enough. So I wanted to bring on a friend actually who is a licensed family therapist at Free Indeed Therapy here in Houston, Jeremy Paxton. He's actually a former podcast co-host of mine. Just to kind of get some insights on, I don't know, mental health and anxiety. We discussed it a little bit in season one, but I think, we're all going through stress in our lives and how to manage it. So, Jeremy, want to welcome you to Cautious Coffee. How's it going?
Good, good. Happy to be here.
Yeah. So Jeremy, what's wrong with me?
Well, that would take a little bit longer than we have today to fully um, parse out. But what you had, at least from your description, to me sounds a lot like what we call a panic attack. And panic attack is it's an episode of intense anxiety that somebody has, usually over a discrete period of time. It didn't last forever, but a lot of times people believe they're having heart attacks, and a good chunk of the time when people show up to ERs believing that they're having a heart attack, the ER physician sends them home and gives them some anti-anxiety pills. So, panic attacks for a lot of people start from misinterpreting physical symptoms as a sign of some major health incident, right? So if you're already under a lot of stress and you have a lot of anxiety in general, your body's going to start doing weird things, right? Like your heart rate's going to be elevated, maybe you're going to be sweating more, lightheadedness, fatigue, all that kind of stuff. And a lot of people would naturally interpret those as maybe signs of something more serious, right? And then you take that incident with our fraternity brother dying. Austin and I were in the same fraternity, Baylor, and you kind of have a perfect storm for an episode of anxiety. So it's something that happens, but thankfully it's treatable. But this is the kind of thing that happens to everybody at least once in their life. Most people have at least one panic attack in their life. Some people have them all the time, and what we call panic disorder. But this is all part of stuff that I treat day to day. Health anxiety in general is something that bothers a lot of people.
Yeah.
People worry a lot about their health. So, and there's good reason to. I mean, my gosh, we have a doctor on our smartphone all the time that can tell us that we're sick and dying.
Yeah. It's kind of wild too, because I think back to when I was in college, and I've told the story a few times more as a joke, but my old roommate, Kobo, love the guy. But I remember we were playing beer pong my senior year of college, and he comes to me and tells me that he has leukemia. And I was like, oh my gosh, Jacobo, like, how do you know? When did you find out? And he's like, well, I haven't gone to the doctor yet. I just looked up my symptoms on WebMD. And I was like, okay, well, if you think you have leukemia, you should probably go see a doctor. And I've laughed about that for like 15, 16 years. And then, I almost did the same thing, right? Like thinking that I had the heart attack. And it was really interesting because when, going back several months, my dad was like, hey, you should go get your heart checked, just do it. It's part of your regular exam. And I finally did. And it was really nice, like talking to the doctor, who was very understanding. He was young, good kid. I think, I can't remember which med school he went to, but he was talking about, just data. And he's like, look, the odds of something like this happening are very, very rare. And I had to pause for a second. I was like, yes. In my life, I look at data and analytics and try to make decisions based off of that. But when you use anecdotal data, it can mess with your mind a little bit. And, that was reassuring just to kind of hear. And, I think talking about it is helpful for me. But D-Ray, I don't know if you've had any.
Have you talked to anyone, Austin?
I'm going to.
Okay, we're the first people that you're going to talk to about this. Is that what you're telling me?
No. I haven't talked to a professional.
Okay.
I've spoken to several people about
I'm
this.
so curious what's going on with you.
I'm sure it could be Billy Passy, it could be other things, but I think that one of my colleagues at work suggested, you've got benefits to go talk to people, take advantage of it. And I've never gone to a therapist, but I think it's something I know I have to do, just to.
That's surprising. Surprising, Austin. Usually
not talking to a therapist.
Yeah. You
It's
encourage others all the time, but I've never been.
A lot of men don't. It's not something that comes natural to a lot of guys. So you might say that male mental health in general is a little underserved. So.
Yeah. And D-Ray, when we started talking to Cautious Coffee, like, back when we started it as like an internal thing, like I think that was the most that I had started like opening up to people. And I really felt that was like good to do. It felt healthy. It felt exhilarating, to be able to finally talk about those things. But I think deep down, there's still things that we don't want to talk about. And why is it that we don't want to talk about those things?
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
But I'm still surprised, Austin. because I thought you were like, evolved. Yeah. I thought you were like one of the evolved ones of us, but I guess not. So no one's immune.
No, what about you? I mean, you're a high level athlete. I mean,
Yes.
sports psychology, is that something that, has
Yep.
been kind of
I've
a
done a
focus for you?
ton of sports psychology and then in the military as well. And whenever I even shared with my son, he had a state tournament over the weekend and he was talking about how he was nervous. Like anytime I get nervous, I do box breathing. That's how I
Mhm.
just try to bring myself like to a baseline, just a steady state, uh, so I can gather my thoughts, like wrap my arms around my thoughts and be in the present moment, and not let my imagination run. Right, I go straight to something's wrong with me, something's happening, I don't feel well,
Mhm.
especially when I'm going to compete. All that adrenaline, I'm just burning through it in my mind. I'm just, and then by the time I get into the ring, I'm spent. Like
Mhm.
mentally, I'm spent. I've done way too much judo in my brain, and now I can't execute my game plan. Uh, and it's happened previously, when I was a younger athlete. But then once I started like getting control of my mental state, I also became stronger, like outside in the real world. So it gives me an advantage a lot of times in whatever arena I'm in, just being under that kind of pressure and being able to control it. You manage it. You do the dance.
Yeah.
Right.
It's never ending.
I
It's
believe
never ending. It's like I just manage it as best I can.
we've seen other level athletes go through the same thing. I mean, you look at Naomi Osaka,
Yeah.
who's been very open about, her mental health. Simone Biles in the
Mhm.
2021 Summer Games in Tokyo, who, set out some events, and now again she's world champion, 26 years old, going for her third straight Olympics. But it impacts everyone. But Jeremy, kind of like you alluded to, a lot of men just don't want to talk about it.
Yeah, a lot. Yeah, right. A lot of guys don't want to talk about it, and so much of when we talk about like sports psychology, performance is linked to staying in the moment mentally, right? But the more you get dragged into things, right, thoughts, memories, anxiety about the future,
Yep.
it's easy to lose focus, and that's when people's performance suffers. So a lot of
Mhm.
what you do in terms of like enhancing performance is helping people stay in the present moment, what we call the here and now.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, broadly speaking, male mental health is underserved, and a lot. I mean, I would say most of the people I see week to week are guys. They are guys who have a hard time talking about not just their feelings, but just the other things that are going on in their life. And anxiety is probably the top thing that I treat, and secondarily to depression. So it's anxiety is a future focused problem, right? We worry about the future. We don't really worry about the past. Past already happened. We can feel embarrassed or ashamed about the past, but we worry about the future. When of course when things are uncertain in life, we tend to have stress about it. We tend to worry about it. A little bit of anxiety is good, right? We want a little bit. It keeps you safe, right? It makes you look both ways before you cross the street. But when we have anxiety about things that are unrealistic, right? When we have anxiety in excessive amounts, that's when it really can begin to bog somebody down,
Yeah.
and you can get this overwhelming dread that people can live with every day and put you in a vulnerable place where you can have things like panic attacks come in and start, you can start having more problems day to day if you don't take care of that overarching anxiety. And that's a lot of what I do.
Because we're in it's a fight or flight response, right? We're like
Yes.
we're turned on, and we're not supposed to be just on. So
Right.
we start breaking down. If we sustain whatever that thing is that we're going through, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And a lot of the fight or flight response is responsible for a lot of problems that
But
people
it's
have.
supposed to be like,
Anger.
we ran from the thing, it's over now, and we come back down. But
Right.
we're locked in the on position.
That's
Uh,
right.
yeah,
And you're not using the front part of your brain. The front part of your brain contains what we call the prefrontal cortex. Okay. This is where all your all your judgment, all your executive function is. And when you're in that fight or flight state, you're not using that very much.
Mhm.
Right. So, sometimes when I have a couple that's getting into arguments and everything, I tell them to go to bed and sleep on it.
Yep,
The reason I do that is I want to get them out of their fight or flight response so
yep.
that the next day they can wake up and use the front part of their brain to negotiate whatever the problem was, right?
And that's why I box breathe.
Hmm.
right? So I can,
Right. Exactly.
yeah,
Deep breathing, active visualization. There's a lot of things you can do
yeah.
to get your body out of the fight or flight stage. I mean,
Just be in a quiet place. Yeah.
absolutely. This is something I learned working with kids. You can just hold a couple of ice cubes in your hand over the sink. I know that sounds silly, but it really does, for whatever reason, take the mind off of whatever you're worried about. It makes you focus on the ice in your hand.
Mhm.
So I've had some big grown guys feel a lot better, and they go grab these ice cubes out of their freezer and hold it over their sink, and whatever they're angry or anxious about tends to go away, at least momentarily.
Why is that? Just focusing on the cold, the
Like,
reaction?
part of it is the sensory. It's anxiety is not just a mental phenomenon; it's a whole body
Mhm.
experience, right? And so, part of the treatment for anxiety doesn't just involve the thoughts, right, and your thoughts and beliefs. It also involves your sensory environment. So, if you're having a lot of anxiety, sensory interventions are a great way to sort of bring that back down. So, like, one, deep breathing is one. Some people like wrap themselves up in a weighted blanket, and that can help, right? Ice cubes, right? It takes the mind off of the thing you're anxious about, but there's something more about it than just distracting you. So, but sensory interventions are also a great way to treat anxiety.
I'm kind of curious on that because I was having a conversation with someone last week, and that was something that he pointed out was that you got to find something to switch your brain, and I think like your sensory example with the ice makes sense. But he said for him, his trick is to like cross his eyes, and for
Mhm.
him, I guess that's kind of like a reset, like what are some other things that you can do, because I know when you hear of like therapy, I think a lot of people, especially like, you know, the way I grew up and what I thought I knew about therapists is that they're just going to
Mhm.
drug you, right? And
Right.
give you prescriptions and then you become reliant on that kind of thing. But like, what are some things that you can do, I guess, naturally to rebalance yourself? I mean, there obviously I assume like exercise, sleep, which D-Ray had a great newsletter last week. If you haven't read it, check it out. But what are some other things that you would kind of suggest?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's two different. I guess I approach anxiety based on the client, right, what their needs are. But there's two main avenues of intervention. There's the mental side, right, and giving people the thinking tools to work their way through their anxious thinking, right. And then there's the kind of the physiological side, which is sleep. What is your diet? How much are you sleeping? Are you drinking enough water? Are you staying away from drugs and alcohol? Daily drinking causes anxiety, what we call the hangover anxiety or hangxiety, right? That's actually a thing. And so, staying away from drugs and alcohol, getting enough sleep, all that kind of stuff, right? Getting enough exercise. That's probably more than half the battle for a lot of people, because a lot of people know that the things they're worried about are kind of out there, right? They know that they're unrealistic, but they kind of fixate on them anyways. And that's a sign that they're maybe not taking care of themselves all that well.
Yeah.
So, when we can solve some of the lifestyle issues, we can, more easily treat the irrational thinking that's causing them to be afraid. Now, on the thinking side of things, right, and this is really important, I think, for anybody to know, anxiety, there are three pegs that hold up anxious thinking. There is the overestimation of risk. That's number one, right? We tend to overestimate the likelihood that bad things are going to happen to us. Number two is what we might call the impact error, or we overestimate the impact of bad things were they to occur on our life. And then the third is we tend to underestimate our own resources to deal with the problem, right? So, if you guys, either you guys been in a situation where the fear before you did the thing, right? Like, let's say meeting somebody new, right?
Not
Or public
skydiving.
speaking, right? It's like the fear of doing it is worse than the thing
Yeah.
itself,
Yeah.
right? Well, anxiety lies to us and tells us that, well, you're just going to completely fall apart. You're going to completely fall apart. You're going to embarrass yourself. It's going to be terrible. You're never going to recover from it, right? Oh, that's all irrational thinking. So, giving yourself not just a game plan of what you're not going to believe, but also what you're going to tell yourself instead
Yeah.
is really part and parcel of how you change not just your thinking, but also how you feel. So,
I,
thoughts
I,
cause feelings, right? We understand that that's with notable exceptions, that's mainly how your feelings work. When you feel anxious or when you feel depressed, more than likely there's some thoughts behind those feelings that are making, if not causing them, certainly making it worse.
Yeah, I call it the downward spiral of doom.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So as soon as those negative thoughts, you got to kill it immediately.
Right.
Yeah, bash it in the head.
That's
And
right.
you,
Bash in the head. And well, okay. So this is something that people listening can take home with them. This is what's called the worst case scenario, right? Whatever you're worried about, what is the worst case? What is the worst possible thing that can happen, right? Realistically, right? We can imagine a lot of unrealistic things happening, but what is the worst possible thing that can happen? And then walk your way back and say, okay, what is the best case scenario? What's the best outcome here, right? And then in the middle of that, what's the most realistic outcome, right? What's the worst? What's the best? What's the most realistic, right? Now, adjacent to this, if the worst thing does happen, will it matter in a week, a month, and a year? Ask yourself those questions and see if you're still as concerned about the thing that you're worried about happening. And oftentimes, sometimes the danger is real, right? And we do need to take steps to mitigate that. But a lot of the time, the things we worry about are exaggerations of things that are unlikely to happen or things that we just don't have a lot of evidence for.
I'm kind of curious from a data perspective, Jeremy. Are there any is there any data out there that shows that, because I know the number, it's like 1 in 5 adults in America suffer from some sort of mental health issue or mental health concern. Is there any data out there to show any discrepancies based on age? Are there any triggers that impact one generation over another, whether it's like social media, whether it's um, retirement, anything like that? Any trigger points that maybe skew the data one way or another?
Sure.
modernity, Austin. It did it to us.
No, I mean, you're absolutely correct.
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine how much less anxious people would be if we didn't have smartphones? We have these supercomputers in our pockets where not only are they very helpful, but they're extremely intoxicating. I mean, one of the things I'm confronting a lot in young people post COVID is this thing called bed rotting, where people they come home from work, they sit in their bed and they scroll for hours and hours and hours. Sometimes they'll get out to get to the gym, but they're just lost in the social media landscape, and it's making them feel anxious, it's making them feel depressed. It's really not any more happy. And one of the most effective things I can do for young people is say, delete all your social media apps for 2 weeks and see what happens.
Yep.
Right? You can always re-download them. But to answer your question, Austin, phase of life transitions are huge trigger points for all kinds of mental health issues. There are some natural periods of time that some mental health conditions hit people. For instance, bipolar disorder and schizophrenia have what we call a hot period between the ages of 16 or 18 and 24. The people who are going to get it typically get it then. But depression, anxiety, other mental health issues, they can hit people at any phase of life, right? And sometimes that's in response to the death of a loved one. Sometimes that's a job loss. Sometimes it's something traumatic that happens. Adjacent to anxiety, one of my specialties is PTSD, and if we're talking about things that can affect generations of people, I mean, trauma is certainly something that can show a huge impact on somebody's life, right? And I'll just give you an example. There's something called the ACEs study. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of the ACEs study before. So no. ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And when the ACEs study came out some years ago, what they discovered was that the number of traumatic events that a child went through. So, for instance, being physically or sexually abused, early exposure to drug use, having a parent incarcerated, right? These are what we call ACEs. So, the more ACEs you had, the higher likelihood you would have an addiction. The more ACEs you had, the more likely it was that you would end up in jail. The more ACEs you had, the more likely it was that you were going to get cancer and heart disease. And that was really shocking, was that trauma, if you've been through traumas if you went through traumas as a child or an adolescent, your chances of getting physical health conditions went up.
That's wild.
Yeah. So what I tell people is trauma is not just an artifact of the mind. It also impacts the body. And so, and a lot of what I do in treating trauma is addressing not just the mental side, but the physiological as well. Because recovering from PTSD it's a whole body experience. And we have a lot of good therapies now, fortunately, to treat it and get you feeling a lot better.
D-Ray, I'm kind of curious from your end because Jeremy mentioned PTSD, and I know you served our country, and I imagine you've got a lot of friends who have been impacted by that. Just what they've seen.
Yeah, it's interesting, and Jeremy brought up the ACEs study, and there are folks that may experience the same thing, but how they experience it, it's just different. It
That's
impacts
right.
them different. So it's kind of hard for me to, I can only speak from where I sit. I know that there are trigger pullers that went down range, and they could be right next to one another, both in that firefight. One dude walks away, he's cool, he's fine, goes home, runs for Congress, does a bunch of cool stuff, he's fine. The other guy's just torn up. Um, and he has to seek out treatment. His life is falling apart. So who knows? Just like your chemistry, your body chemistry. I think I may have mentioned that during one of the interviews with Adam. It just, there are so many different variables, so many different ways that you're going to respond to that stimuli.
You're right. There's a lot of individual variability, and
Yeah.
how, and I think it's a misnomer to assume that just because somebody served in the military, they must have PTSD. That's not,
Yeah.
that's not
Right.
true. But yeah, one of the things that, of course, I give special attention to when it comes to men and women that serve in the military is traumatic brain injuries. And I find that there is a correlation between TBIs and severity of PTSD symptoms.
Yep.
And so, and they don't even necessarily have to hit their head. Just being in some of these explosions can do that. So,
Yeah, you speak of traumatic brain injuries. I think I've shared this on the podcast before. My dad had a stroke when he was relatively young, and I think that was also kind of a contributing factor to me with the anxiety. Just knowing I'm around the same age, and
you are your brain.
yeah, exactly. But he went to the Tier Hospital, which is the Texas Institute for Research and Rehabilitation here in Houston. It's one of the best brain injury facilities in the world. Gabby Giffords went there after she was shot, what was it, 10, 15 years ago. And we can kind of see a difference, just in him and, his emotions. There have been some events, and sorry, Dad, if you're listening and I'm, oversharing, but, there have been some events where, he'll just, kind of get emotional. We're not sure necessarily like what caused it. But I remember growing up, like that's something that I didn't experience that, now we see that happen and we're like, hey, it's all right. Don't worry about it. And I think, sometimes he might feel embarrassed, but it's like, look, you've been through a lot. You weren't supposed to make it. And here you are, 20 plus years later.
That's a generational thing, Austin. My father, he's 71, and his wife passed a couple of years ago now, like 2 years ago, February. And he did not want to cry. I was on the phone with him, and he did everything he could to like hold it in and not cry. I said, Pop, of all the times that it's okay to cry in front of me, this is it. This is the one right here. So please, let it out. Stop trying to be a macho guy here. That's not necessary. And for me, I embrace what I'm feeling. I don't mind if I'm grieving or if I'm sad or if someone hurt my feelings. It could be because I could probably beat them up. But so I'm okay.
Accurate.
I'm okay sharing because it's like it doesn't really matter anyway. But I want to be the example. Like it's okay for someone like me who could probably, do some serious damage to be aware of my feelings and share them with others because there's no reason for us not to. It's part of the human experience. I'm not a machine by any means. I bleed just like everyone else. And I thought it was so odd, like really just blew my mind. And I would pause and listen and pause and listen. And it's got to be a generational thing like that. Just that generation, they just did not cry. and then later on in life, it's all kind of pent up.
Yeah.
And they'll have some episodes on you.
Yeah, and there a lot of men have beliefs around weakness and emotion. Emotions tied to this perception of, well, if you show emotion, there must be weakness there, right? And that a lot of men kind of want to stay to the, well, I can just handle it, right? I can just like bite my and grit my way
I'm
through
gonna,
it.
be a man. I'm gonna be
That's
a
right.
man.
Yeah, right. Be a man. Which, don't get me wrong. I think there's a time and a place to express emotion, right?
Yeah.
There's you want to think practically about it, but men have for a long time been under this duress where they can't cathart is one way to say it, but they can't express themselves. And so what they've done is they turn to alcohol, they turn to drugs, they get lost in hobbies, certainly things that don't make them great family men. So I think awareness is really just the key for a lot of guys, just becoming aware of what their feelings are, right? How do they feel? And, just that awareness gives you a level of control.
Yes, absolutely. I agree. And then, others will begin to appreciate it, right? And you're just, you're modeling the behavior that you want around you with your friends, with your children, with your significant other. And it can be really powerful. So it's not a weakness. It is a strength. It's absolutely a strength.
Right.
And, the more you can do it in your sphere of influence, like the better off those relationships are going to be.
Especially with your children.
Yeah.
So it's follow the parent. Number one rule of parenting is follow the leader, and you are the leader.
Yeah.
So
that's great insights. We are just over 30 minutes in this episode, so we'll go ahead and wrap it up here shortly. But Jeremy, I think there are a lot of people that do go to a therapist, whether they're having issues or whether they're not, just for peace of mind, that kind of thing. And a lot of you that are listening to this that work in the corporate world, your benefits probably cover to some extent, therapy sessions. Jeremy, for people out there that are interested in maybe speaking someone or finding somewhere to go, whether it's through their employer benefits, or maybe they don't have benefits and they're trying to find resources, how do you get started?
It's a great question. There's nowadays with these online platforms, there's a lot of availability. There are a lot of therapists that are exclusively online, and that's a great place to start. You've got outfits like BetterHelp. There's Grow Therapy. There's Alma. There's a lot. I mean, you can go to Google and find it pretty easily. Now, a lot of people have benefits through their health plans called EAPs, or employee assistance programs, that will provide up to sometimes it's 10 sessions free of charge, which is pretty great. So, employers really do, in the last probably I'd say 10 to 15 years, maybe longer, have really stepped up and will provide in that realm, because they do, I've seen that a lot of insurance companies really want you to get better. Or they want you to go to therapy, because people who go to therapy tend to have fewer ER visits, which are more expensive, insurance companies. So, things like that, they are starting to cover more and be better about. So it's about reaching out. Some people can call their EAP or their insurance, and they have an EAP provider, and get started from there.
That's good advice. And any recommendations that you would give in terms of I don't know, finding the right match? I've heard stories of people going to 2 to 3 therapists and then finally settling on someone that they feel gets them and they have a positive relationship. What are things that you would look for, in kind of finding the right person?
Sure. I think first is interpersonal warmth. I think you need to be around somebody who you can relate to, right? And who you feel is getting you and listening to you. That's probably the number one quality. Second to that, or maybe of equal importance, is competence. I want to make sure somebody knows what they're doing. It's nice if they've been practicing for a little while. And I'm not. That's nothing against new therapists, but when it comes to finding the right therapist, I think finding somebody that not just you feel good with, but also somebody who has experience treating the thing you're dealing with. So, but
That's good advice. D-Ray, any parting words or thoughts that you have, kind of on this episode?
Yes. It's our responsibility, right? Our mental health is our responsibility. Our physical health, it's our responsibility. So It's not Jeremy's responsibility. It's not D-Ray's responsibility or Austin's, right? For somebody else. It's our individual responsibility to know our brains and to know our bodies. And to have awareness, when something's going on. So Austin, I applaud you for, going to the hospital, going to the ER immediately. Some men will be like, sleep it off, or I don't know, I'll go for a walk. My rule is like 48 hours. If I'm not feeling better in 48 hours, I'm going to the hospital. But know your brain and body, give yourself the best chance to, be able to, battle some of the stressors that we have in our lives. There's a really good book. There's actually 2 books, Brain Bugs and Incognito. I think I read those books when I was maybe in college, and I learned how your brain loves to trick you. So if you don't know that, and your brain is tricking you, you won't even think about it. You just think something's wrong with you, and it won't be normal for you to be like, oh, that's interesting that my brain did that and had me thinking or feeling that way. And then the body piece is like we really need to get exercise. And when I was speaking about modernity being the cause, it's like we don't do enough hard things, right? We just kind of we sit down, we sleep in a really comfortable bed. We all are, even the carpet, the shoes we put on our feet, everything is like we're surrounded by comfort.
Yeah.
We don't walk anywhere. We don't really do a whole lot. So, get in that gym and break a sweat, and maybe you'll feel a little better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, mindfulness, exercise,
Yes.
sleep, like you mentioned last week.
Yeah,
that's what I'll start.
Balance. Yeah.
D-Ray, your point, a little bit of adversity is good. A little bit is keep you sharp. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I tell parents your kid needs to have a little bit of adversity now, or they're going to create their own adversity later on in life.
Yeah. That comfort is killing us.
Is it last question for you, Jeremy? I mentioned this on the podcast. Like, we didn't grow up financially well off, and I didn't realize a lot of that until I was older.
Hey, me either, Austin.
Yeah, and is that good if your parents? I know they want to protect you, but like if they shield you from that kind of thing, or how would you address that with kids?
Oh, that's a really good question. The issue of finances.
We're just coddling generally, I think, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, okay. So when it comes to kids, I want kids to be able to be kids, right? It's one thing if the parents can't keep that information from the kid. I generally, though, don't like for kids to have a lot of info on finances unless they absolutely have to. And the reason for that is that children will worry a lot about their parents and try to take care of their parents. And that's a reversal of the role and the way it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be the parent worries about the kid, not the other way around, right? Until the parent's older and needs it, right? But childhood anxiety is one of the huge things that can drive a wedge in between a parent and child. And so the less the child worries, the more childhood they have. I generally think the better it is for them later on. If you burden children a lot with anxieties and complain about your financial problems or your interpersonal problems, what they do is they worry about you. And so when they have a problem, now they're not going to come to you because they got to take care of you because you've got all these problems, right? So who do they go to? They go to their buddy who's smoking pot. So it's really important that you create an environment where your kids not just feel safe to talk to you, right? But they also know that you're going to be okay.
Yeah. Good advice. Well, I thought this was a good episode, and thanks for kind of going off track with me here. But I just felt like if I'm going through this, I know someone else is, and I don't know. This isn't like me trying to just have an anxiety or panic attack just so we can record an episode of Cautious Coffee. We've got a lot of other great content that we want to record on, and I don't know. I just felt like
we're just keeping it real.
Yeah,
that's right.
I mean, while it's fresh, bring someone on. I happen to have a friend, Jeremy, who does this for a living, and just thought we'd have it. So
I can guarantee you that somebody listening to this right now has had the exact same experience that you have. So it's good that we're talking about it.
Yeah. So let us know what you think of this episode. If you need any advice or counsel, Jeremy, I'm going to put your information out there. Just go to freeindeedtherapy.com/Jeremy. If you're in Houston, great. Maybe Jeremy's not the right guy for you, but I'm sure he can at least provide, the right resources and point you in the right direction. And, also EAP option that Jeremy mentioned, that's something that's incredibly important as well. So that's it. Cautious coffee. Any
Austin,
yeah.
Austin, my man. What about, and I'm sorry, Jeremy,
Okay, go for it.
what about the folks that don't have access?
Yeah.
Mm.
Great point.
You know?
Pause, time out. Answer that question, Jeremy.
Yeah, we got to give that a think.
You're right. Access is a huge issue.
Yeah.
So a lot of therapists, a lot of therapists will do sliding scale for people that don't have benefits or don't have the means to pay sticker price, so to speak. And that's between you and the clinician, right? There are a lot of nonprofits. You could go to the United Way and look at resources that they have also, but there are a lot of low income options for people that want counseling. We can find it. Of course, there's a lot of churches that hire licensed therapists that also will provide counseling services. So there are options out there. You do have to go digging for them, though.
Seek it out. Ask
Absolutely.
about it. Be unafraid to help yourself, please.
Right.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Yes, sir. It was a great question.
We had to have it in there. So D-Ray, thank you for always pushing, never settling. That's what happens when you look fly. So.
Appreciate you, Austin.
All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed the episode. Let us know what you think. Send us comments, feedback, or if you have a personal story or anything that you want to share. If you have resources that you can share, definitely hit us up on our social platforms. We'll find it there. But until next time, my name's Austin Staton, alongside D-Ray Crane, Jeremy Paxton. See you later.